What do you think of the new theater? I was talking, you all know George Mock. George was at an executive committee meeting the other day, and George said, yes, the theater, it looked like it should smell of mildew, but it didn't. But now it looks great. So the work done in here has just been resplendent. I want to take a couple of minutes and thank a couple of people in a few minutes. But first, just a couple of formalities. Where's Rep. Paul Schmid? Somewhere. Paul, where are you? Oh, Paul had to leave. Oh, for goodness sake, there's at least 10 votes against him. Dick Kugler, are you still here? Dick, where's Dick? Dick, good to see you. Always welcome. Great to see Dick Kugler here. Jonathan Stevens has come down from the American Textile Museum in Lowell. Great to see you, Jonathan. We're working on a partnership with the museum, and we're really looking forward to it. And thanks for your loan of objects for the upcoming exhibit that Christina Canet is putting together. Bill Lynn. Bill, did you make it? Bill Lynn, the new executive director at Harrishoff Marine Museum. Bill did not make it out of Bristol, Rhode Island. I see the Paneros are here in force, and our sponsors today, Luzo Auto. There's Emily, Victor, and John, Maria. Thanks very much for everything you're doing. Thanks, guys. Victor's shoveling a lot there. It looks like you got a lot of reflected glow. Is that a suntan, or is that just from the snow there, Victor? The mural behind us, you're all familiar with the New Bedford Ocean Explorium, but when it closed, there was this great Arthur Monese mural, and doesn't it look fabulous right behind here? That is Arthur Monese's, and it's just great. That's Ben Baker's Aerial 2, and there's Ernestina, all heading out. I'm not sure what it means. Everybody's leaving New Bedford, but they should be coming. Burgess Electric put in these new LED lighting up here. Russ Moran and Tony Ormond put in a whole new sound system. We gutted about 20 years of old sound equipment and audiovisual equipment and completely revamped this place, and we really thank Tony Ormond for the work there. Dana Costa and Troy Benson. Where are you, Dana? Thanks very much for creating this ship's bow. The beautiful decorations in here and pulling all this great stuff out of the collection that we didn't know we had. The curatorial team, Christina Canet's team with Jordan Burson and Melanie Correa and Scott Benson put all this up, and I think it just looks terrific. So nice job, guys. Very well done. And you might be wondering why we gave everybody one of these. Did everybody receive one of these? Okay, well, don't open it. I hope nobody's, wait, nobody has eaten their lifesaver, right? Really? Victor, you just can't take the Portuguese to these old Dartmouth Society events, can you? So, well, now hold on to these lifesavers if you still have it, because there's a chap here, and his work ethic knows no bounds. This is a great time, because I'm going to embarrass somebody now. This is wonderful. So the man we're going to talk about has been with the museum for a long, long time. His work ethic is just absolutely tireless. He drove the whole project here. He was our project manager. You'll all know him in John Silva. And just a moment before you clap. John has been undergoing a chemotherapy regime now for the better part of a year. But what you don't know is he hasn't missed a day of work. It's just been stupendous. So if you could all give a very warm round of applause to So we can't have champagne in this theater because John wouldn't let us. And don't litter with your lifesaver, but just bear with me, because is Joe and John, if you could come down here. We have something for you. Okay, now we're going to test your IQ here. Joe, come on down. Louis, could you come forward? This was designed by Starling Burgess. Louis, could you present this to Joe and John?
I wish to present. I made this myself.
Now you've got to open it.
Let me hold it while you do it. It's very heavy.
So, John, would you hang this on ceremoniously hang it off that little cruddy hook that's on the bow of the boat here? Now, that says the SS Silva. The other side, I don't know whether you noticed, said the NE Silva. So if you go to West Marine and you buy lettering, you only get 4 S's. I'm not kidding. So we were very smart. If you look at what SS is in Portuguese, because John's parents are from Portugal, and you come up with Navio Escola. The Sagres is the, I'm probably butchering it obviously, Navio Escola is educational vessel, so it's the NE Silva, which is so appropriate for the theater. So John, buddy. Okay, all right, that's done. All right, next. Okay, we have next on the docket. All right, how are we doing on the time? I lost a clock in here. Okay, so now, by way of introduction for the Burgess book, I want to thank a number of the sponsors who are in the room as well. Steve Taylor's here, who made it all possible, along with Gurdon Waddles, and Kathy Waddles, John and Tally, who chipped in. Sue and Cal Siegel are here. Carol Taylor, John Decknatal, Lloyd, and Ann McDonald, Jack and Nancy, Brent Meyer, and of course, Jay and Louis. Jay didn't make it down, Louis. Okay. And we thank you all for supporting the production of the book. I hope you all buy it. I was thinking, Louis goes by the acronym LLH3, and if there was a chromosome which could best describe ODHL, or ODHS, I would have to say it's LLH3. You really are the DNA of the institution. And by way of introduction, and of course Louis needs none, I would say the best part about introducing Louis is just that. You never want to follow Louis in any talk. I do want to thank Michael Lapides for stewarding the project through. Michael is here. I want to thank Jay Howland for copy editing. And the partnership, I see Matt Stackpole, who is with Mystic there. Matt and everything that Mystic Seaport did for us. We raised about $90,000 to get this book. It's a beautifully crafted book by David Godine, and it's selling like hotcakes. So Louis is head of our scholarship committee. We're going right on to a Hunt book, which is coming right up. I don't want anybody to get too excited, but if you do want to talk to Alison afterwards, we are looking for about $150,000 for that, but that's really a matter for a different day. Isn't that right, Brody, as we try to raise funds for that Concordia model we want to buy, but we won't dwell on that. And so, Louis, you have pushed us the hardest. You're going to love this. Louis has pushed us the hardest. Louis, you have propelled us the furthest. Louis has pressed our donors for largesse, and now he has given us Burgess. Louis Howland. You may now eat your lifesaver.
No wine for you. If I lie right down there, oh, no, please, oh. It won't be long now. I like the little whine that is moaning. Oh my goodness. It's a face. The Shroud of Turin. All right. Well, I think time is going by. I think I might as well begin. I'm looking out over a sea of faces, but there's a big blank area up in the middle. I don't understand it. People just are not tough enough to come out in a little bit of snow. I don't understand it. Don't understand it. Thank you for coming. The human memory is a wonderful thing. But even more wonderful was the eye of the late Paid-Air marine photographer Norman Fortier. His superb collection of yachting negatives is among the treasures of the New Bedford Whaling Museum. Here is a photograph that Norm took early in August 1949 as boats in Class A maneuvered before the start of a squadron run of the New York Yacht Club from Edgartown Harbor to Nantucket. The yawl on the right is the 116-foot Manxman, designed by W. Starling Burgess in 1927. Just astern of her is the little 12-meter Nereus, originally and currently named Northern Light. Nereus was designed by Olin Stevens. She was under charter that August to Nonquit's own Daniel D. Strohmeyer. As it happens, I too was present at Edgartown Harbor as the New York Yacht Club fleet prepared for the start of that 1949 squadron run. I was sailing with my father, and I think possibly with my older sister Sally, but I won't swear to that, in a Beetle Cat. And although the name of the Beetle Cat has long since vanished from my memory, the sight of the magnificent Manxman and the name of her designer, W. Starling Burgess, never will. 66 years is a long time to be fixated on the life and work of a deceased yacht designer. But out of this obsession has come a biography of Burgess that has just been published and is the reason why I'm speaking to you here tonight. The title of the book is No Ordinary Being. The price is a very reasonable $65, less a generous discount for museum members. And have your credit cards ready and sales clerks so standing by. The lordly J-boats Enterprise, Rainbow, Ranger, the immortal fishing schooners Mayflower, Puritan, and Columbia, the breakthrough staysail schooners Advance and Nina. Printed accounts of such boats contributed to my early interest in Burgess. Then, as a boarding school student at Milton Academy in the early 50s, I had many opportunities to learn more about Burgess, who was one of the school's better-known early graduates. Just as important was hearing from my grandfather Howland, also a Milton Academy alumnus, about his brilliant and eccentric young schoolmate, Billy Burgess, about a sea and airstruck kid who dreamed of manned flight and went on to become the first New Englander to fly an airplane and the first and only American manufacturer authorized to build aircraft under license from the Wright brothers. It was Grandpa who told me about the elaborately wrought model glider of Burgess's own design that Burgess launched from an upper-story window in his Milton dormitory, right up there, believe it or not, in 1893 or 94, only to see it plunge, in Burgess's words, like a leaden weight and smash through the cellar hatch below. My grandfather was not the only one who witnessed the flight. Billy Burgess had invited the whole school to the event. And as Burgess recalled that for the rest of his life, he could still feel the hot tears of shame. Had I proposed to demonstrate perpetual motion, he later wrote, I could not have been more ridiculed. What made this story so suggestive to me was not the humiliating failure of the glider to fly, but the fact that the accident befell the newly orphaned son of Edward and Caroline Sullivan Burgess. He, young and brilliant and the most famous American yacht designer of the day, she, one of Boston's most celebrated beauties. Was ever a child more fortunately born, or with better expectations of being raised in a secure and loving home? But for Starling, the idyll soon ended. He was 12 and a half, his brother, Charles Payne Burgess, 3, when the 41-year-old Ned Burgess died of typhoid fever in 1891, at the zenith of his meteoric career. Ned's wife, the beautiful Kitty, died only 3 months later. It was said of a broken heart. By all accounts, theirs had been the happiest of marriages, and Starling's the happiest of childhoods. And what a remarkable role model Ned Burgess had been. Born to great wealth, he had graduated from Harvard in 1872 and had pursued the comfortable life of a gentleman scholar and yachting dabbler until the sudden collapse of the family fortunes in 1883. Literally overnight, it was the Cuban sugar trade and the Havamaya Sugar Trust took care of them. It was then that Ned, compelled for the first time to earn a living, began his career as a professional yacht designer. Ned's success was immediate, dramatic, unprecedented. Not only did he possess the aptitudes and technical skills that innovative yacht design requires, he had the competitive drive, the energy, and the ambition that can turn even adversity to good advantage. To top it off, his success was fed by a booming Anglo-American economy that led almost inevitably to the 3 back-to-back America's Cup challenges of 1885, 1886, and 1887. As the designer of the triumphant Boston-financed Cup sloops Puritan, Mayflower, and Volunteer, Ned Burgess swept the fleet. And I want to mention, by the way, that we have in the audience tonight a great-great-great-great-grandson of General Charles Payne, but I won't tell you who it is because it will go to his head. There was another factor working in Ned's favor as well. He was a near contemporary and a close friend of Nathaniel G. Harrisoff and had been heavily influenced by Uncle Nat's designs and design theories during the 1870s. But he had begun his own professional career as a designer of racing sailboats during the 1 decade when Uncle Nat's work was largely steam-related. Harrisoff did, of course, triumphantly return to the design of racing sailboats in 1890 and 91 with the revolutionary and invincible 46-footer Gloriana. But the 1891 racing season had only just begun when Burgess contracted typhoid. He did not have to reckon with Gloriana's victories, nor for long did his widow, Kitty. Starling Burgess has written that after the first few months of homesickness, he greatly enjoyed his 7 years as a boarding school student at Milton Academy. If his schoolmates ever made fun of his surgically repaired cleft palate, then and now widely known as a hair lip, he made no mention of it. And by the way, it was really a remarkably well-prepared, repaired lip. They didn't really have the medical knowledge then to do it the way they do it now, but it still, he didn't have any speech impediment. If his slight build made him a less than powerful member of the football team, he excelled as a gymnast. 4 decades later, he was still able to do victory handsprings on the decks of the America's Cup sloops Enterprise and Rainbow. As for schoolwork, Starling then and thereafter generally stood at the head of his class. And during his final year at Milton, Burgess was even able to settle the score with those students who had laughed at the crash of his model glider. That year, he invented a recoil-operated machine gun on which he received U.S. patent number 591155 in October 1897. It was a real, honest-to-God, working machine gun. It was also during Starling's senior year at Milton that a new boat was built to his order by Harrisoff at Bristol, the light displacement 17-foot sloop Sally II. The building of Sally II gave Starling a pretext for spending as much time as possible at Bristol with Uncle Nat, a toddling L. Francis, and the rest of the Love Rocks household. Legend tells us that when Uncle Nat learned that Starling had ambitions to become a yacht designer, he declared his model room permanently off limits. Some 40 years later, Starling paid the ailing Nat Harrisoff a farewell visit, and Starling, who had never lost hope that he might eventually be reunited with his parents in an afterlife, raised the subject of immortality, or to be more accurate, the possibility that human personalities survive bodily death. You know, Nat Harrisoff told old Francis later that day, sometimes Starling talks funny. The faculty at Milton Academy thought highly of Starling and warmly endorsed his application to Harvard with the class of 1901. Kind of a weedy-looking picture, but that's the way he looked at that time. There, as a freshman, he excelled in scientific and engineering subjects. Then, in his sophomore year, and against his guardian Uncle Sidney's wishes, Starling took a leave from college to enlist in the Navy at the start of the Spanish-American War. After serving briefly and seeing combat off Cuba as a gunner's mate on the USS Prairie, he returned to Harvard. But instead of graduating, he quit college in the middle of his senior year. On the first working day of January 1901, he opened for business as W. Starling Burgess Company, yacht designer and broker, in an office in downtown Boston. Starling later regretted his decision to leave Harvard without a degree, but the same impulsiveness that had led him to join the Navy and open the design office without graduating prompted him in October 1901 to marry a young invalid, Helene Adams Willard, from nearby Lexington. Starling and Helene lived together in Salem for less than 9 months before Helene, afflicted with a congenital and incurable spinal disease, which I assume is spina bifida, committed suicide in June 1902, and it was just the worst kind of blood all over the place, kind of newspaper reports all over the headlines and all that kind of stuff. Very ugly business. Bad for her and bad for him. Starling assuaged his grief and loss by writing quantities of poetry. In the summer of 1903, the theme of his poetry turned from love lost to love found, as he began a passionate affair with Rosamond Tudor Higginson, the estranged wife of an important design customer, sportsman Alex Higginson. And by the way, Alex Higginson's father was the man who created the Boston Symphony Orchestra and underwrote it for years. When Rosamond, a strong-willed artist and with a young son, sued Higginson for divorce that fall, Starling found it expedient to make an extended business trip to England. Rosamond's divorce lawyer, by the way, was William M. Butler of New Bedford, son of the longtime minister at the Seamen's Bethel. Butler went on to become head of the Republican National Committee and a U.S. senator in the Coolidge era. Who knew? In England, in addition to meeting various yacht designers and builders, Starling celebrated the British publication of The Eternal Laughter, a gathering of his poetry for which Rosamond Tudor Higginson had secretly contributed pen and ink decorative borders. We just learned about this about 2 to 3 weeks ago. This is new and it's not in the book, so you hear it here for the first time. That's very important for you. Take it home with you. Also in London, he paid several visits to the fading poetic eminence Algernon Swinburne, and he continued his education in naval architecture. I wish I could report that the Eternal Laughter was a work of underappreciated literary genius. It is really not. And it most certainly is not A Million Laughs. But it could only have been written by a young, naive, and intensely romantic artist of great intelligence and sensitivity who had experienced death and the loss and rekindling of love in searing fashion, and who then and throughout his life was willing to risk ridicule and failure in his pursuit of inexpressible dreams. Of the 223 designs W. Starling Burgess Company and its successor firms produced between 1901 and 1911, some 42, including several that Starling had begun before opening his design office, were completed during Burgess's first year in business. Pretty remarkable, really. And among his first patrons were his one-time Milton schoolmate, John S. Lawrence, 3 members of the Loring family who had been among Ned and Kitty's closest friends, and General Charles J. Payne, for whom Edward Burgess had designed 3 successive and successful America's Cup sloops. That Starling's family and friends rallied around him in his efforts to establish a design practice may not in itself be very surprising. What is remarkable is the high rate of success his early designs enjoyed. Then and always, Starling had the ability to convince others of his genius by being so supremely confident of it himself. One is reminded of the friend who had heard that Starling was able to produce the sum of the serial numbers on the cars of a long-passing freight train. Was this true? Starling shrugged and asked, "Who can check?" The boat that brought Starling Burgess his first celebrity as a yacht designer also led to his second and longest marriage. This was the monstrous scow sloop Outlook, a winner of the 1902 Quincy Yacht Club Challenge Cup. Designed for Alex Higginson, Outlook proved to be a distinct turning point in American yacht racing history, as well as in Starling's personal life. Quote, "Several measurement rules were tried in America in the early days of yacht racing," Burgess told a group at MIT in 1935. "The most useful and harmful was the cubical contents rule, placing a premium on low freeboard and light displacement. It produced the American skimming dish type of yacht. The ultimate in skimming dishes was the sloop Outlook, designed by me under a rule which required only that the waterline length not exceed 21 feet. The principal dimensions of Outlook were overall length 52 feet 7 inches, load waterline length 20 feet 10 inches, beam 13 feet 6 inches, draft of hull 8 inches, least freeboard 13 inches, and total sail area 1,800 square feet." Ah, what a horrible boat. Quote, "The construction of the Outlook was as extreme as her shape. It may be said to have been airplane construction before there were airplanes. The huge flat hull was held together by a steel truss." Yes, that is it, right there. Just the kind of thing you put your knee on that and you would have no skin left on your knee when you crossed over. The huge flat hull was held together by a steel truss about twice the depth of the hull. The Outlook's racing record was 7 starts in 7 firsts. And after that, she was retired to limbo and the waterline length rule was decently buried. Unquote. Starling and the newly divorced Rosamond Tudor married in 1904. To say that the proceeding was considered scandalous in proper Boston may not be altogether accurate. The new couple was securely listed in the social register, and Rosamond was awarded custody of little Henry Higginson. On the other hand, people took notice, and when Starling and Rosamond built a year-round house for themselves next to Starling's new boatyard on Redstone Lane in downtown Marblehead, their distance from the established Brahmin order widened further still. And this is some new information which I'm going to add. It was about this time that Starling first got to know his next-door neighbor on Redstone Lane, Father William Shinnick, a noted amateur astronomer and the pastor of Marblehead's Star of the Sea Roman Catholic Church. His friendship with Father Shinnick led Starling to become a Catholic in 1918. This is not in the book. It was completely unknown until I learned about it more recently. I wish I had, and by the way, he was godfather in the church was Albert Zahm, who was one of the great aviation pioneers. So it had a lot to do with flying and astronomy and God. That's the way it ought to be. I wish I had time tonight to discuss in detail a few more of Starling's racing sailboat designs from those early years. The 21-foot cabin class sloop Little Haste, for example, winner of the East-West Championship in 1902, the brutal 56 by 26-foot scow sloop Corinthian, winner of the 1904 San Francisco Perpetual Challenge Cup, and that was a real brute. That was even more brutal than Outlook. And the brilliant Q-class sloop Orestes in 1906, and a string of outstanding Sonder boats, Wolf, Ellen, and more. And here is a Wolf, And I'm sure many of you know what these Sonder boats were, looked like that, and they still do. Very wet. They're not really suitable for Buzzards Bay at all, but they were very fast and sporty in their time, and they were great international competition. Not all his designs were winners, of course, and some were losers by any definition. But Burgess's remarkable ability to analyze and find loopholes in measurement rules would serve him in good stead throughout the rest of his career. The design of racing sailboats may have been Starling's first meal ticket and his ultimate claim to fame, but he never lost his youthful fascination with steam, with internal combustion, and with the potential for manned flight. He never forgot the times he spent as a Milton Academy undergraduate observing kite-flying experiments at the observatory atop Milton's Blue Hill, and most emphatically not the day when one of the kites flying at a cruising altitude of 15,000 feet broke away from its piano wire tether. As it fell to earth, the piano wire successfully shorted out power lines and electric trolley cars all the way from Milton to Quincy Bay. Great stuff. As to steam, one of the boats that Burgess designed and built for himself in his newly formed Marblehead boatyard was the 9.95 ton steam workboat Ox, which his wife got a license. It was not an engineer's license, a pilot's license. He was required to have that license although on a vessel of that size, but at 9.5 tons, she was able to do it and not have further licenses. I don't know how the hell it worked, but anyway, it was interesting for licensing purposes, and I don't know what the licensing was all about, so let's move on. He also designed the 800-ton Boston Floating Hospital. I don't have a picture of that in this series. She was a big 250, 300-foot, three-deck floating hospital. And he designed a 46-foot cruising steam launch for his brother Charles, and in 1923, the 120-foot steam yacht Enage. He loved steam, and he was very good at designing steam engines. As to internal combustion, the international autoboat craze hit Massachusetts Bay and the Eastern Yacht Club in 1903-04 and hit it big. How many here are familiar with the concept of the autoboat? It's not something that's widely known. It's what it sounds like. It's just a boat with a big engine in it, and they became runabouts. But the early autoboats were pretty horrible boats, I got to tell you. For Starling and his new partner in the design and boat building business, Alpheus A. Packard, it was an irresistible opportunity to enter an entirely new recreational boating market. And for their client, Herb Bowden, a racing sailor with deep pockets and a love of fast motor cars, it meant taking a run at the Gold Challenge Cup that had just been placed into competition by the American Powerboat Association. Thus was born Burgess and Packard's first and most successful autoboat, the 60-horsepower Mercedes USA, which in the summer of 1904 briefly held the world record for speed in her class at an incredible, blistering 25.5 miles an hour. This is a later development of the Mercedes, and I can't tell you much about her except that's what they look like. The autoboat craze was mercifully short-lived. The boats were wet, they were unseaworthy, they weren't really all that fast, they were expensive, and that was the end of that. The autoboat craze was mercifully short-lived, and in the end, Burgess proved and also ran. No matter the intensive experience with high-speed gasoline engines and fast displacement hulls had given Burgess a vast fund of practical and theoretical knowledge that he applied to his design of the pioneering 133-foot gasoline-powered fishing schooner Elizabeth Silsby, and the 103-foot, 19-knot passenger vessel Pineland. And these were considered, if not the earliest, among the very, very earliest of gasoline-powered vessels of their size. The experience also gave Burgess a whole new vocabulary for the language of speed. If he could not earn his fortune flying through the water, perhaps Starling could earn it flying over the water. Writing to the secretary of his Harvard class in 1911, Burgess reviewed the first 10 years of the boat business and noted that he had designed small steamers, motor yachts, trading and fishing schooners, racing yachts, cruisers, and racing launches, also 5 one-design classes. Then, moving to another subject, he wrote, in 1910, I became interested in flying and built 5 airplanes. Airplane A, which I flew on a short flight at Chabaco Pond, February 28, 1910, was the first flying machine to fly in New England. I experimented in the summer of 1910 at Plum Island and encountered many difficulties and disappointments, but became completely fascinated with the work. I formed Burgess and Company and Curtis, airplane builders. In December, we were offered by Wilbur Wright license under the Wright patents. We are the sole licensees of the Wright. Someone has a phone that is misbehaving. Take it out and stomp it. And he ends, flying is the most wonderful sport in the world. And this is an early, I can't tell you exactly which aircraft this is, except it has wheels, and his earliest aircraft had just skids, so it's pretty early. And by the way, I don't mention it elsewhere in this talk, he was a really very good pilot. He had a couple of accidents, but he had a really pretty good record, and he was, one of the really great pilots of the early era. So that's one of his talents. Starling Burgess is truly the forgotten man of American aviation. Chronically underfunded and bled white by confiscatory Wright license fees. And another telephone, I think. This is a bad night. The Burgess Company grew fitfully in the years leading up to World War I, then more quickly as defense orders came in. However, Starling was never able to capitalize fully on his own significant contributions to aircraft design and operation. His best chance for financial success came with the delta-wing Burgess-Dunn hydro-aeroplane, which was based on the work of British Army engineer John Dunn, and for the successful development of which Burgess was awarded the aviation's highest honor in 1915, the Collier Trophy. That's an extraordinary aircraft you're looking at. Stable to a fault, capable of landing safely even without a pilot at the controls. The Burgess-Dunn machine promised to be the ideal air yacht for venturesome amateur pilots and sportsmen, but not in wartime, and not for military use, with its lack of airspeed and its very stability made it unsuitable as a combat trainer or a fighter plane. So there was this great creation, and it really went nowhere, except it's still a great aircraft. Starling's work on hydroplanes also seemed to promise great things. He understood how to form the hulls that made the boat take off and land safely. But in this, as in so many instances, the ever-disciplined and resourceful Glenn Curtis of Hammondsport, New York, soon preempted the field. In the period between 1910 and 1916, yacht design and construction was more an avocation for Burgess than a primary source of income. And his aviation work, perhaps especially its financing, took a heavy toll on his health and peace of mind. In New York to seek underwriting, he was felled by a gastric ulcer that was to plague him off and on for the rest of his life. A major operation followed, but the palliative of choice for recurrent pain was morphine. In time, morphine dependence itself became a chronic problem for Starling. He made a major resolve to beat the habit in 1921, but did not finally overcome it until his ulcers were successfully treated at MGH, actually, in 1940 by a great doctor named Miles Baker, wonderful man, who I knew. Nor was all well with his marriage to Rosamond. Granting the dynamics of any marriage partake of mystery, Starling and Rosamond were, in 1912, visited by a tragedy that might have damaged or destroyed even the most perfect union. It was late one afternoon in June. Starling and Rosamond were below on their boat in Marblehead Harbor, while 11-year-old Henry Higginson, 7-year-old Edward Burgess II, and 5.5-year-old Frederick Ted Tudor Burgess played on deck. Unaccountably, Edward fell overboard. By the time Starling and Burgess reached him, Edward had drowned. It was a loss from which neither parent, and certainly not young Henry or young Ted, ever fully recovered. In 1915, Rosamond gave birth to a daughter named Starling, who quickly gained the nickname Tasha, short for Tolstoy's romantic heroine Natasha Rostova. Following the Burgess' divorce in 1925, Tasha Burgess became Tasha Tudor, and young Frederick dropped his Burgess surname and became Frederick Ted Tudor. Having lost his first son by drowning in 1912, Starling then, for all intents and purposes, lost his second son and a daughter by judicial decree. Decades later, Tasha Tudor, by then a celebrated author and illustrator of books for children, could vividly recall the morning in early 1925 when she saw her beloved papa off on the train to Reno, Nevada, I guess you say now. "Kiss goodbye to your father," Rosamond instructed Tasha, "because you may never see him again." In 1915, Starling and Burgess Company President Frank H. Russell made the difficult decision to sell Burgess Company to industrialist John Willis and the Curtiss Airplane and Motor Company. It's not clear exactly how much Burgess himself ultimately netted from the sale, but enough at least to pay his old friend William Hand of New Bedford to design, and his old friend Reuben Bigelow of Monument Beach on Buzzards Bay to build for him the 36-foot gaff cruising sloop to which he gave his pet name for Rosamond, Seal. And unfortunately, I don't have a picture of Seal the boat, but I have a picture of his pet seal, Woo. And Starling had a pet seal that he loved dearly. He drove with Woo, the seal, through Marblehead with Woo pretending to be at the wheel and Starling behind, operating the controls. And they went sailing together, and it really was quite a relationship, quite remarkable. And interestingly also, Seal, when Burgess, this is a sidebar, but too important to leave out, when he sold the boat in 1920 to get on back into real life, he sold it to Merrill Hunt, who was a member of the New Bedford Yacht Club and whose son was treasurer of the New Bedford Yacht Club for years and whose grandson was a great friend of mine. It's interesting when a famous yacht designer comes to New Bedford to get his boats designed. That's the way it's always been. It's good that way. So the seal, the boat seal, represented all the seaman-like virtues that were missing from his extreme competitive designs. The log he kept of his cruises on Seal gives dazzling evidence of his navigational skills, his delight in cruising and the simple pleasures of life afloat, his fascination with the natural world, his mechanical genius, and his endless intellectual curiosity. The log also contains a tantalizing reference to a young woman named Elsie Foss, whom Starling had first encountered in Wonalancet, New Hampshire, during a family vacation the previous summer. At the time, Elsie was 15, a farm girl. In 1925, she would become Starling's third wife. Starling re-entered the U.S. Navy in 1917 with the rank of lieutenant commander, no longer a gunner's mate, in the construction corps. There he co-designed the Navy C-class dirigibles and the NC aircraft that flew across the Atlantic. Although his formal involvement with aircraft design ended with his discharge from the Navy in 1920, he never lost his passion for flying, his interest in aeronautics, or contact with those he had worked with in the aviation business. A civilian once more in 1919, Starling, along with Rosamond and young Ted, spent the winter cruising in Florida and West Indian waters on board the Murray Watts-designed motor sailor Treasure Trove. And I show you that because, again, it's sort of like Seal and a motor sailor version. Starling, for his own boats, he liked a pretty simple, straightforward boat. He was not interested in bells and whistles at all. As a member of the Biscayne Bay Yacht Club, Starling got to know the club's legendary founder, yacht designer Ralph Monroe, and to renew his friendship with Monroe's winter neighbor in Coconut Grove, N.G. Harrisoff. It is quite likely that his conversations with Uncle Nat were what inspired him to seek out L. Francis Harrisoff, then 20, who, against his father's wishes, had joined the Navy in World War I and was now, also against his father's wishes, dreaming of a career in yacht design. At almost the same time, Starling got back in touch with Francis Harrisoff's contemporary, General Charles J. Payne's youngest grandson, Frank, whose great-grandson, what are you? Grandson or great-grandson? Grandson is here in the audience tonight. for whom Starling had designed the very successful little racing sloop Gypsy before the war, and who had worked for Starling after graduating from Harvard in 1912. Francis Harrisoff and Frank Payne had each demonstrated an exceptional aptitude for yacht design. Each stood in relation to Starling as precocious nephew to favorite uncle, and neither had been academically trained in naval architecture or marine engineering. During the latter part of 1919 and on into 1920, Harrisoff and Payne found themselves in Provincetown, working under Starling's companionable but exacting direction, and being schooled in yacht design by a teacher of unique gifts and vision. Artist Charles Hawthorne, who was pretty much the dominant teacher of art in Provincetown in those years and was Rosamond's teacher, painted more than one portrait of Starling in Provincetown. Playwright Eugene O'Neill was a neighbor and close friend. They were really quite close, and they did a lot of drinking together. Gin and poetry and lots of drafting were the order of Starling's Provincetown days. It was in this period that he had his first exposure to America's Cup competition as a member of the afterguard of the great William Gardner sloop Vanity, and as the designer of Vanity's new rig. Although Vanity ultimately lost out to the Harrisoff sloop Resolute in the 1921 America's Cup trials, it had been a very near thing and had done much to raise Starling's international standing as a yacht designer to watch. Starling was, to be sure, disappointed by the performance of two early 6-meter sloops, Sheila and Jeannie, that he had designed in Provincetown for the 1921 Sewanaka Cup trials with input from Francis Harrisoff and Frank Payne. On the other hand, the one design international rule racing sloops that came from his board in such profusion in the mid and late 1920s did much to popularize the rule in America and to demonstrate the surprising ability of meter boats in challenging conditions of wind and sea. They were a far cry from the scows and other rule-driven monstrosities that Burgess had produced so cheerfully a decade or two earlier. Their influence on the work of the young designer Olin Stevens was direct and profound. The art design and brokerage partnership of Burgess and Payne opened for business in Boston in autumn of 1921 with L. Francis Harrisoff as design associate and marine engineer Norman Skeen as chief draftsman. I should perhaps note that Payne was made full partner not because he possessed greater design ability than L. Francis, or for that matter, the seasoned professional Skeen, but because it was his capital that was helping to fund the operation. With Burgess, cash money was one commodity always in demand. The Burgess and Payne partnership was subsequently enlarged by the advent of the now mostly forgotten powerboat pioneer and super yacht designer A. Loring Swayze, the man later responsible for the creation of the final and greatest Morgan steam yacht, Corsair. I might add, also designed the great 110-footers, of which 450 were built in World War I, and he designed a lot of great boats, that man. The partnership endured only for 4 years, but although its life was short, its production was remarkable, including many open-class winners. Starling's 3 superb bank schooners. They are some beautiful boats. This photograph was taken by, this is from our collection here at the Whaling Museum. That's Columbia, who, in the opinion of some, the most beautiful fishing schooner ever designed. Certainly, probably the fastest, and was lost in the most tragic way. Here's one of his steam yachts. This is the Enadge, which is Jane spelled backwards, very clever, wow. And this was one of a number of large fisherman-type schooners that he designed during the 20s that were in the 60 to 100-foot range. This was called the Philosopher. And the interesting thing about the Philosopher was that after she was built at great expense by a very demanding and exacting owner, the owner went on a cruise with her, maiden voyage from Nova Scotia down to Boston, and discovered he got seasick, and he got off the boat in Boston and said, "Sell her. I don't want to ever see her again." Great to have money. It's wonderful. And also, when Harrisoff and Payne were working with Burgess, was created, I don't have a picture of it here, unfortunately, the famous 88-foot schooner Advance, which was the first true staysail schooner, and the result of a happy union of unanimity of thinking between Starling and his old Milton schoolmate John Lawrence. Accounts differ as to the reasons why the Burgess and Payne partnership broke apart, but there appears to have been plenty of blame to share. Equally complicated were the reasons for Starling's long brewing separation and divorce from Rosamond, his move to Manhattan, his marriage to young Elsie Foss, and the creation in late 1925 of the new design and brokerage firm of Burgess and Morgan, or later briefly Burgess, Rigg and Morgan. Like Burgess and Payne, Burgess and Morgan combined the talents of a major yacht designer with the design aspirations and substantial capital of the scion of one of America's foremost yachting dynasties. The son of Edwin D. Morgan, for whom Edward Burgess had designed the fabled schooner yacht Constellation, and Harrisdorf, the 46-footer Gloriana, Jasper Morgan was close in age to Frank Payne, boat crazy like Payne, and of a similarly creative turn of mind. But it was to Starling's rainmaking skills that the new partners were chiefly indebted for the succession of lucrative design commissions that came the firm's way in its 5-year life. Among them, the 80-foot M-boat Prestige. I want to mention that because the foreman of Concordia's boatyard for many, many years was Captain Martin Jackson, who was also my grandfather's professional skipper and one of the most able seamen who ever trod a deck. And he was sailed on Prestige for several years and used to tell me great stories about Harold Vanderbilt. So it means a lot to me. Anyway, the M-boats were big and precursors of the J-boats, as you know. Burgess and the firm also designed a one-design class of 12 meters, a larger one-design class of 8-meter sloops, and a one-design class of 10 meters. There were 14 in that class. This is a tremendous thing when you have a one-design class of 10-meter boats. And then finally, 99 in the first round anyway, Atlantic one-design sloops. And there are some Atlantic sailors here tonight, and wherever I go talking about this book, there are passionate Atlantic sailors. This class has been going since 1929, and it's probably going as strong now as it ever did. They're really quite wonderful boats, and certainly most best-known one-design class that Burgess designed. The firm of Burgess, Morgan, and Rigg was very much a creation of the Roaring '20s. It flourished in a time of fast cars, fast boats, fast women, fast money. It quickly folded with the collapse of Wall Street, but all credit to the partners. The boats that it produced were fine boats, and some of them, one such being the schooner Nina. Those are the 10 meters, by the way, and they're lovely boats. Very, very good boats. Very good fun to sail, very able, good boats. And here is, I don't know, if I had to choose the one boat that Burgess designed that means the most to me personally, it's Nina. She was fantastic. My Uncle Wally sailed on her a lot. She sailed in Buzzards Bay a lot. Norm Fortier took a lot of photographs of her. But she sailed all up and down the East Coast, and she beat everything. She kept beating boats until there was no end. And alas, she was lost a couple of years ago, probably unnecessarily, but tragically, certainly. So she's gone. And she was built on Buzzards Bay by Reuben Bigelow. Good man. Okay. The story of Starling Burgess in the 1930s is both exhilarating and appalling. It begins, of course, with the selection of the Vanderbilt Syndicate's Enterprise to defend America's Cup in 1930, an extraordinary moment when J-boats designed by Burgess's protégés, Frank Payne and Francis Harrisdorf, and his arch rival, Clinton Crane, met Enterprise on the racecourse and were, one by one, eliminated by her. The story continues with the termination of his brief third marriage, his bankruptcy, a real mess, his briefer partnership in Bridgeport, Connecticut with visionary Buckminster Fuller in 1933 and 34, and the creation of the controversial, short-lived but perennially fascinating three-wheeled Dymaxion automobile. Incredibly forward-looking automobile, which has just been rebuilt. A replica has been built by the great architect and engineer Sir Norman Foster, and she's just as magnificent now as she was then. A car that was 75 years ahead of its time. And by the way, just to dilate on that a little bit more, Burgess had a lot more to do it than he ever got credit for from Buckminster Fuller, let me tell you. So there was the Dymaxion, there was Rainbow, an incredible photograph. She wasn't a great boat. And why someone recently has built a new Rainbow, is building her. She was a dog. She was a real bad boat. But incredibly beautiful. Her problem was her short waterline. When you have a boat like that, you want a long waterline, because the Marconi rig, high aspect ratio Marconi rig, gave her much more power than anyone realized. Anyway, the Rainbow was designed when he was a partner of Boyd Donaldson, and it was a mess of a partnership, and he never got paid his commission. Very sad. There's more. Starling is courted by Pittsburgh's Aluminum Corporation of America, Alcoa, and by Maine's Bath Iron Works, which share a vision for a revolutionary fast destroyer to be designed by Starling for construction out of aluminum. His work for Alcoa and Bath Iron Works coincides with a commission for Hal Vanderbilt to co-design with young Olin Stevens a J-boat with which to defend the America's Cup against the Second Endeavor. And I think you all know what that boat is. And I could easily talk for another hour or two or three or whatever on the design of Ranger, on the relationship, complicated, between Starling and Mike Vanderbilt, and even more complicated between Mike's wife and Starling's wife. Not to speak of the relationship, cordial and productive, but not really that close, between Starling and Olin, or the relationship, creative in the extreme while it lasted, between Starling and Olin's tank testing mentor at Stevens Institute, Professor Kenneth Davison. And I could talk about all this, but I won't. But I must mention that Starling, now resident in Wiscasset, Maine, with monthly alimony payments due to 2 wives, including child support for the 2 enchanting daughters he has had with Elsie Foss Burgess, is falling out of love with his 4th wife, Annie Dale Biddle, and is in the process of falling in love with Marjorie Gladding Young, a doctor's daughter from Newport, who has become Starling's secretary and design associate, and who will, in the fullness of time, become his business partner and 5th and final wife. And there's more, so much more. The aura of invincibility that the success of Ranger gives Starling does not last. A major design commission from Dutch aviation prodigy Baron Anthony Fokker, you want to pronounce that for me, it's F-O-K-K-E-R, Fokker, is canceled when Fokker dies during minor surgery. Burgess's naval test tank work with Ken Davidson at Stevens Institute in Hoboken fails to live up to its early promise. The once hopeful relationship with his near Harvard College contemporary, the then dominant American naval architect William Francis Gibbs of Gibbs & Cox, sours. This was a prototype for the 50-knot aluminum destroyer. It was a 1/3 scale model of a 100-foot patrol craft that was going to be scaled up to a destroyer size. And it was a very fast boat and a very able boat, too. But it didn't work out. His partnership with Joseph Weaver takes him first to New York, then to Washington, then to Florida. It produces many design commissions, including the edible plate. But it ends up producing, I wonder if I've got, yes, that's on its side, but you can use your imagination. It's too complicated for me to explain why it's called the edible plate, except to say that it was designed to cross the Atlantic and be completely broken apart and used in various constituent parts by the British and be much cheaper than a Liberty ship, and it didn't work, that's all. It ends up producing only unflattering articles in Time magazine, canceled contracts, unavailing congressional appeals, red ink, and very bad blood all around. As Weaver Associates goes under, Starling suffers a major coronary. Joe Weaver's health fails, and a 3rd partner dies of acute alcoholism. When his Texas divorce from Nanny becomes final in 1944, Burgess has 3 alimonies due each month, amounting to more than 50% of an annual income that is projected to run as high as $12,000 a year, but never seems to come even close. What saves Starling professionally during World War II is the very naval establishment that had so bedeviled him during the years of the gathering storm. And it was really the recognition of his one-time employee, Admiral Louis de Flores, that got him on the right track. Admiral de Flores, by the way, and I have to, this is a New Bedford audience, and I have 2 cousins here and my sister. Adam de Flores used to work for my grandfather with the New England Oil Company, setting up an oil refinery in Fall River, Mass. So he's well known in my family. He was a fascinating human being, a brilliant, brilliant engineer. Anyway, de Flores recognized Starling's talents and set him up with the Anti-Submarine Development Detachment of the Air Force, the Naval Air Force Detachment of the U.S. Atlantic Fleet, otherwise known as ASDEVLANT, another romantic name. That Starling, and there he did extraordinary work and was determined to be uniquely qualified for the challenging assignments he had been given, and consistently delivered more than he was asked to deliver, sometimes far more. This is the kind of thing he did. This is a snorkel, a self-propelled snorkel designed to simulate a German sub. And there's Starling riding it around in Florida. Some fun. So that's what he did in World War II, and he did do amazing things, I got to say. It's a whole book in itself. And Starling and Marjorie Young were married early in 1945 to the delight of Starling's younger daughters, Anne and Diana, against the urging of his son, Ted Tudor, and to the surprise of very few of their close friends. In the opening weeks of 1947, Starling and Marjorie were doing ambitious damage control research for the Navy under the aegis of Stevens Institute. Starling had added longtime friend George Crouch to the team, and Crouch, who used to be the house designer for Henry Nevins, and is perhaps best known today as the designer of the great Gold Cup boat, Baby Bootlegger. Crouch added a lot to the esprit and productivity of the Burgess office. Turn that off. In that spirit, Starling wrote his daughter, Tasha, that January, quote, "As a boy, I lived a fairy dream life," he recalled. "My dreams would take a special bent and follow that trend for days consecutively, each dream taking up with that of the night before left off. A most vivid one was that of growing a beard and a square-yard mustache to hide my hare lip, and then becoming the pampered favorite of the king of an improbable country situated in the tropics. The king threw open his coffers and gave me his workmen skilled in all the arts, gave me his dockyards and his shops, and bade me dream and build all sorts of curious things. In the last war, the thread of that actually came through." In a sense, it was too early. It always had been too early for Starling to begin planning for the future. Although he was nearing 70, he had absolutely no intention of retiring. For once, his income exceeded his outgo. The little cruising sloop Pomelian, designed by Marjorie in 1940 with Starling's guidance, lay at the Wiley Yard in Oxford, Maryland, ready for a new season of sailing. Starling's health was not great, but it seemed to be stable. He still did smoke, heavily. His ulcers occasionally flared up. On the other hand, he weighed no more than he had at Harvard and had the lanky build and wiry strength of a long-distance runner. If then he had premonitions, they were modest compared to the cheerful prospects that unfolded before him. He was even able to report at breakfast on March 19th, 1947, that he had just dreamed once more of the fantastical kingdom of his childhood, a tropical city with golden towers. For decades, the precise details of the dream city had eluded him. Now, suddenly, they reappeared in all their splendor. And Starling Burgess died very suddenly of a heart attack later that morning. The king threw open his coffers and gave Starling workmen skilled in all the arts, gave him dockyards and shops, and bade him build all sorts of curious things. I don't think we need that. What the hell happened? Well, isn't that odd? Sorry, just bear with me for a moment. I want to just end with a picture of him if I can find it. Maybe it's dropped off the map. Oh, what a sad... There we are. Okay, that's what I want. Sorry to overreach. His inventions did not change the world. His yacht designs did not materially improve the health and welfare of humanity as a whole. The pleasure they gave his design patrons is another matter entirely. His personal life was, by conventional standards, untidy, transgressive, or worse. Too often he allowed his vision of what ought to or could become to blind him to what more likely would become. Prudent and practical and self-critical, he most emphatically was not. But like all great artists, Starling had the courage and willpower to follow the path before him wherever it led. He never took the easy way. He never settled for the merely expedient, much less the shoddy or second rate. He seldom rested, and he never looked back. He was a fool with money, as his partners learned to their sorrow. He was helpless without it, as his creditors learned theirs. His wife paid a heavy price for having married him. Each of his children was scarred in consequence, unseemly, unfortunate, but true, all true. But over the 60 and so years that I've been following Starling's life, I've come to love and admire the man more than I can easily express. I admire his mastery of the art and science of naval architect and yacht design. I admire his way with pets and wild animals. I admire his skills as a navigator, a helmsman, and a ship's husband. I find his literary gifts, if not his skills as a poet as such, remarkable. His wit, his sensitivity, his fluency. And beyond all else, I love thinking about the scrawny orphan with the hare lip who went to my old school for 7 years, who dutifully did his homework, who cheerfully took all the crap that his schoolmates could dish out, and who went into the world still believing against all the evidence that he would one day fly. And Starling Burgess did fly, higher, farther, and with greater daring and skill than did mere mortals of his time or our own. Thank you. Thank you. I've given this talk a couple of times before, in fact, more than twice. And I have found, at least several times, that the questions are more interesting than the talk. So I would love to, I was at Mystic a couple of weeks ago, and a couple of people asked me questions that really pinned me down. And I'm glad to, I'm up for it. I'm sure that this was a pipe dream that they really worked on. There's something completely missing from my presentation tonight, and it's not Frank Payne about whom I could, there's a lot, much more to be said, but we're going to leave that to his great grandson to tell that story. But Burgess had a brother, Charles Payne Burgess, who was the #1 man in lighter-than-aircraft dirigibles. And did the Akron and all the great lighter-than-aircraft before Shenandoah and all those amazing, tragic vessels. And Burgess really was fascinated by flight, and so was Frank Payne. There's no question about it. And I just wish you could find that. Could you find the blueprint?
I don't know what happened to it.
I mean, let me just, this gives me, yeah. It's not there. I can tell you, I mean, I literally have been on this case, not full-time, thank God, for a long, long time. And when I finished the book was out, it was in hardcovers, done. One of the Burgess grandchildren called me and said, "You'll never guess what I found." Photographs and letters, dating from the early years, which I have nothing really original on Burgess from 1900 to 19. Everything I've done there are secondary sources. These were passionate. I mean, these letters burn up on the page when you read them between Starling and Rosamond. there's all kinds of stuff I learned. This whole business of his relationship with Father does anyone here come from Marblehead? Have any well, there's a Benson in this room, but Father William Shinnick. Does that name ring a bell with anyone here? Father William Shinnick was born in County Cork, became a priest, became a missionary priest, went to Australia, and somehow found himself in Salem, Mass. Around 1860. And had a parish in Salem. He went to North Cambridge. These were all these working class, really, immigrant parishes. These weren't fancy people at all. These were working class people. And then Shinnick was given the parish of Marblehead, which was basically a fishing town. And I think it was more Italian, probably Italian and Irish, but probably more Italian than Irish. And Shinnick was priest there from 1875 until he died in 1912 at the age of 92. And he lived right next door to Burgess, right on Gregory Street. And they became very, very close friends and used to drink a lot of wine and discuss God and all the things that you discuss with people over a glass of wine. And this is all new to me and has opened up a whole element of Burgess's life about which I know nothing. Did he design a helicopter? I'm sure he did. And I suspect it would have been a practical thing, but I suspect that he never really had the funding for it, and he said, "I'd out with it." No money on, he moved. Questions? Please, yes. That's the toughest, that's the saddest thing to consider, really. For example, the Little Dipper is still going, and it's got a new owner and a loving owner who really seems to have done some wonderful things. The Barn Swallow, which is a wonderful boat for anyone in this room that is handy with their hands, is sort of a bag of tricks of a boat, very famous boat in its way. It was designed for Paul Hammond, who owned the Nina. She's on the market now, but she needs a lot of work, tremendous amount of work. There are a few 10 meters. One is owned by a man named Rudiger Steele, who's head of the steel power works in Germany. There is an M-boat, Invincible, I think it's called, or Avatar. There are a few, and there are some 1 or 2 8 meters, and there are some R-boats, and there's a Q-boat. So there are a few around, but they were not, and some of them all were well built, but they haven't lasted well. So there are not many left. Yes?
Can you share any insights into the relationship between Vanderbilt and...
That's a very good question, because I've tried, John Rumanier, I hope, will finally do a book on, Harold Vanderbilt really was an interesting man. I don't think he wasn't a warm and fuzzy guy at all, but he wasn't an evil man either. And Burgess really, I quote Burgess without really thinking about it, but Burgess needed a patron. All great yacht designers need a patron, because yacht design is art, really. I mean, you want a boat that wins a race, okay, you got to win the race, but there's so much experiment and so much potential for mistakes. And Harold Vanderbilt was one of these people. He was very loyal. He was very loyal to N.G. Harrisdorf when he was young. And since he had limitless money, he could have gone to any designer in the world, but originally he went to N.G. Harrisdorf. And then he felt that Starling Burgess had the talent to see and to create what the rule and the times really needed to make a winning thing. His relationship with Burgess was friendly, fairly formal. The letters are not warm, particularly warm. And it all reminds me of something a parallel. I remember asking Olin Stevens about his relationship with Vanderbilt, because Olin Stevens also had a very important design relationship with Harold Vanderbilt. And Olin said, "Well, it's odd." He said, "I always liked Mike, and we got along. He was very fair and decent to me. We didn't have a quarrel." But he said, "It was Rod that he really loved. He he wasn't interested in me at all, but he loved to have Rod around. So they are. I don't think that, I think the toughest moment for Burgess was really in a bad way in 1935 and 36. He had needle problems, he had marital problems, he had financial problems. And when Vanderbilt made the decision to bring Olin in as a co-designer, that could be seen as a kind of a slap in the face, but I don't really think it was. I think he said, Jesus, this guy's on the edge, and I don't want to throw him under the bus, but I don't want to lose the race either. And I think it was a perfectly fair decision, and I think Burgess understood it. So here's my take on Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt was a Vanderbilt, and he was a Commodore's grandson, and our great-grandson, I guess. And those were mean men, deep down. But I also knew a little bit George Plimpton, who really loved him as a friend, and said he was incredibly rigid in a lot of ways. Had very little. He didn't really know how to relax very much, but he was loyal. And he was fair, he was generous. He was actually quite a very generous man. Vanderbilt University will attest to that. So I think he was a great patron for Burgess. There was a comparable, by the way, I don't think there are any Welsh descendants of W-E-L-C-H. Charles Welch, does that name ring a bell with anyone here? Charles, well, I think it would possibly with Mr. Stackpole up in the loge there. But Charlie Welch was a guy, a Bostonian with a lot of money and a great competitive love, and he seized on L. Francis and vice versa. And from 1922 till Charlie Welch died, everything that Welch got designed was designed by L. Francis. And it was a meal ticket for L. Francis, and it was wonderful for the sport of yachting. Everyone won. But the checkbook won, too. All right, any other questions? Well, thank you very, very much. You've heard this before? Did you hear this before?
Thanks, Louis. Nobody's allowed to leave now for another 5 minutes. No, only kidding. You can exit by either door. Louis, thanks very much. John and Emily and Victor and Maria, thanks very much for sponsoring. When you get the inevitable fender bender this winter because of the ice, make sure you go to Luso Auto. We'll see you at the next Sailor Series, which is coming up soon. Thanks very much. And thank you, Louis.